Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hello.
Ms. Berlin is, what did she say? She was setting up something at work.
She's going to be tardy.
Well, she got a hall pass. It's cool. We're going to give her a hall pass and let her go, and hopefully she'll join us here shortly, in sitch, as we like to call it. So, Mr. Betcher, how are you doing this week?
Working hard.
Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah, a lot of RAR stuff going on.
I beg your pardon? RAR?
No, what it is. IR.
IR. What happened? Can you be generic without mentioning anything?
The incidents. Yeah, I have to be generic.
Understood.
Yeah, Trojans, ransomware, all kinds of stuff like that. So
yeah,
keeping me busy.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I just got that email. We're recording on June 20th, so something came out today about Android Outlook. Hey, Ms. Berlin. See, we started just a minute ago. We're all good.
I tried so hard to make it in time.
Well, you didn't reboot it fast enough. So there's Ms. Berlin. Sorry. Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson's our guest this week. Ms. Berlin, that's Ben Johnson.
Hello. I'm in the dark.
Oh, where are you? Are you at work?
No.
Oh, okay. Hey, so I don't mean to interrupt the podcast. Did you get that? Did you get that Chromebook I shipped?
I have not been home.
Oh, okay. It might be sitting on your porch then. I hope it's not raining or anything.
Probably.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry, a little aside. Her mama wanted a Chromebook and I had a spare. Actually, I have two spares. So I gave her one. So anyway, so yes, Ben Johnson, we've had him on the show before. He used to work at another company. He's now working at a better, a more different company, not a better company. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Really pumped to talk to you guys again, and nice to meet you, Miss Berlin.
Right on. So she's still getting situated. So, all right. So Ben, tell people a little bit about yourself if they haven't listened to you at when you were on previously.
Sure. So I'm most well connected and sort of had most exposure through Carbon Black, where I was the co-founder and original CTO of Carbon Black and helped build out, EDR and, continuous recording on the endpoint and that kind of thing. And had some good competition with, your former company and, a bunch of others now. There seems to be hundreds of endpoint companies. Before that, I was NSA and Intel community for 7 years and, really kind of grew up in those sort of classified areas and days, and that was awesome. And then after the Carbon Black journey, and I was doing 100 flights a year, and we're 800 or 900 people. I said, let's do something new. So co-founded Obsidian Security in Southern California. So I moved from Chicago to Southern California to co-found Obsidian Security with Glenn Chisholm and Matt Wolf, who are actually my competitors at Cylance. So wow. I think that's a bit of a funny story too. And now we're 2 years in and, just trying to do something special again.
Very cool. Okay. So yeah, when you reached out, you said, hey, we're doing something called identity analytics. And, the one thing that I was like, well, I'd rather have him on than the other person or other company that we had been talking to about 5 months ago. They use something called behavioral biometrics. So we're going to discuss definitions here in a little bit, but I just wanted to find out what exactly Obsidian Security does other than identity analytics. Is there, other tasks and tools that you use or do?
Yeah, essentially, we've really tried to build a platform where you can take lots of different applications in your environment, pull in telemetry and other information from those systems, and then really have a protect, detect, response story, right? So, really help with hygiene and governance, really help with threat detection and, hygiene and risk problems, and then help you clean it up, help respond, right? But doing it in a different way that, really hasn't been a big focus, which is looking at like SaaS applications and other applications that typically you don't have a good insight into everything everyone's doing unified across those. So, we're essentially trying to understand who has access in your environment and what are they doing. Okay.
All right. So this might actually be a little different. So one, and Ms. Berlin, I hope to be able to pick her brain a little bit. Well, there we go. That's going to be on the blooper reel.
I think this whole podcast now is for real.
Mark it off on your bingo cards, people. So Ms. Berlin's working a lot on the attack matrix for training and purposes. And one of the things I wanted to ask is a lot of security companies that I heard about at RSA this year were trying to show how their product aligns with items in the attack matrix. And I just wanted to find out where your company satisfies those requirements in the attack matrix.
Yeah. So, first of all, I was very fortunate to hang out with the attack team early, right, when they were just starting to put it together. And immediately, I think all of us really liked it, right? Like the witnessing of real attacks, real techniques tied to different stages of the kill chain or whatever. It just made sense, right? And I think that's why it's so popular. For us, it's a little bit different because so much security has grown out of the on-prem world of, IOCs and, host names and DNS and binaries and processes and, that kind of thing. When we're looking at, how is Office 365 or Salesforce or Okta or these other tools, how are those being compromised? Or, what does essentially like privilege escalation look like in those systems, or, theft of data and stuff like that. So, I think it's actually a newer area in terms of like what are these, kind of patterns of attack, patterns of compromise, whatever you want to call them, across these services. And I have to say, I'm a bit disappointed that the community hasn't gone a little bit harder at cloud. So if you look at, the threat hunting summits and incident response conferences and things like that, the majority of the stuff is still talking about DNS and MD5s and things like that. And that's important, but it's pretty rare to see like, how do you do IR in AWS, or how do you do IR in G Suite, or, some of those things. So, I think how we map, there's a lot of, similarities, like I said, into different aspects of, kind of that kill chain, but it is kind of a new world. And I don't think we've fully defined that as a community. And so I'm hoping that we can help there.
Yeah. So this isn't, you guys aren't sponsoring the show or anything. We're not trying to go, well, you guys are just one solution in this space. You just happen to be somebody we've had on before. So, we know and trust you that, it's, you're not crazy and you're just going to go on a rant. So I appreciate that. What kind of data are you trying to collect to ensure that proper access is happening? I mean, some of the stuff I was reading to prepare for this was, keystroke speed, and how hard you punch the keyboard, and how long it takes somebody to type out their password. Are you looking at those kind of metrics, or is there something else?
No, so actually, so that's good stuff. We like that area, and by the way, yeah, I'm happy to talk about this in a more generic way. I go out and give talks and try to just encourage people to do it with, open source scripts and tools and APIs and stuff. So that's all good. There's this notion of AAA, like, authentication, authorization, and activity, and so much of the, I guess, sort of innovation in, you could say, identity or similar, like user type controls, has been on authentication. So you see single sign-on, you see MFA. That's great. That helps immensely. But what is a huge gap is authorization and entitlements, right? You go into any large and even small org and say, who has access right now to your systems? Like, what are your contractors doing? And they'll be, how many admins do you have? Are those admins active? And I'm guessing basically zero organizations have a great answer or a very conclusive, confident answer to those questions. And so, that's really where our focus is. Like I said, it's, I think there's ways to tackle this or approach this that doesn't necessarily involve us. Of course, I hope I get to talk to a lot of companies, but, it's really trying to figure out, like, just the enumeration of roles and privilege and entitlements, and then figuring out the activity and really trying to match those two. So, do people actually use the accounts they have? And I think the gaps often are that provisioning is done by IT or the help desk or the desktop team or whatever. They have no idea of the downstream effects. All they know is a ServiceNow ticket or whatever ticket came in and said, this manager requested that the employee has this access. So, okay, done. But then, was that appropriate and what happened? They don't know. And then if you flip it to the SecOps team, they don't really know who this user is. They see like a username and a host name or whatever, but like what privileges does this person have? What other systems they have access to? Who is this? Like, why is this person related to, involved in this alert? So I think there's just a lot of gaps that are left to be kind of improved on or kind of quite frankly solved, a lot of problems to be solved that involve identity. And the reason like we chose to focus on that is because cloud is just making this such a crazy problem. Right? Like SaaS and AWS and stuff, like it's so fast to spin those up. Like, oh, you now have Slack in your org and you didn't really know that yesterday. And like, okay, now guests are in there in contract, So I think it's just kind of a mess whenever you talk to like identity teams.
Right. So you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I was assuming authentication, authorization, and you mentioned entitlements. What's the difference between that and authentication and authorization? What is an entitlement versus a role or something like that?
It's usually not that different. It's more like, wording and semantics, but it's trying to figure out, just what people have been granted, right? So you could even say grants is like sort of another term, but essentially just what entitlements do people have? What roles do they map to? And then what entitlements or permissions or privileges, right? All these different words, which is part of the confusion. What does that role have, or what does that account have, right? Or that group. So, just a lot of challenges. And I think that's why, starting to apply analytics and other techniques to that to try to, really figure out like, what does your population look like? Those are very interesting problems to me. And I think a lot of other people feel like there needs to be innovation in that space.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Ben, isn't this more of the advanced attackers and the pen testers, the state level going after government intellectual property, things like that, and of course red team and pen tests? I mean, I guess the reason that we're not talking about this at your major security conferences that much is we're still trying to get the basic blocking and tackling here. I don't see, say, most of your malware going after domain admin right away, but I do see pen testers do that technique.
So I like everything you said. I think what's changing is that when you said blocking and tackling and some of the, sort of basics, for newer companies, that is cloud, right? Like the way you're getting attacked is cloud, and, password stuffing, password spraying, whatever, credential stuffing, or mistakes, right? It's not just about adversarial, behavior. It's, I accidentally shared this file in G Suite with the whole internet and it has very sensitive information. Or, how many times do we see the S3 bucket, left open and stuff like that? So, I do think, and I saw a tweet, I think by Dino, that said 90% of cloud security is just, preventing mistakes. But, I think there's part of it too is, and you guys could tell me in your lines of work, but when I talk to incident response firms, they're telling me that the majority of their cases are O365, business email compromise and other sort of similar attacks. So I think a lot of the attacks are moving more to, to cloud apps and things like that. The other thing is insider threat, right? Like, what is your team doing inside Salesforce? I don't know many teams that can answer that question. And that's just an example. And majority of people are good people and aren't doing anything. But, there's just a lot of concern around that. So these are just problems we're thinking about, but I don't think it's just us. It's like the broader, kind of community and people that are managing these apps are starting to have concerns around them.
Yeah. So you mentioned that before, that this could be done with open source scripts and whatever, but the open source scripts, I assume you've got some integrations, like you mentioned Salesforce and you mentioned those systems. It's not overly easy to set up anything open source that would, have the length and breadth of a lot of these solutions that are out there. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do with open source or throwing it into a data lake or whatever, getting the logs and the telemetry. There's absolutely a lot you can do. I think it's similar to like the early days of endpoint, right? Like, and by early days, I mean sort of the more recent, the more recent early days. Like, 8 years ago, where you started to see newer players, newer techniques, that kind of thing, and it was way ahead of any sort of open source alternative. And now you're starting to see things like OS Query and all these other tools kind of pop up and really help, where they're more mature, and so you actually could potentially, use them in production or in a corporate environment. And I think a lot of companies blend that maybe with commercial endpoint solutions. So I think you'll see a similar thing. Like you're going to see companies like us and other companies, drive well ahead of what you can do on your own. And then you'll start to see maybe some open source tooling catch up. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is getting the data, but then there's so much more work after that to just, kind of sift through it and make it usable, similar to, other types of telemetry. So, I encourage people to at least get the logs, have the audit log, be able to rewind the tape and look at things. But, you have to make sure it's in a place where you can use it.
Do you think that the cloud logs that are out there now, doesn't matter what system, are what word do I want to use? I guess maybe as comprehensive as the ones that you get from like all the traditional solutions? Because I've found that they're not, they're a lot more difficult to get sometimes, and they're not as verbose, I don't think.
There's some amazing ones, like amazing APIs, and there's some, so I'll give you an example. Like at Obsidian, our HR like SaaS system that we use to manage payroll and stuff doesn't even have logs. Like I like yell at them all the time, like, you need to be able to give me logs or I'm switching because I need to be able to hook this up for our security. So that's like the far end, like the worst end. And then the best end is, there are some systems where you connect up and they have 3 months of history and they're very well crafted, well constructed, like just the way the APIs are laid out, but then the logs within them are very rich and really try to give you good insights. And then there's a whole bunch, like there's a whole huge middle of like some people are much closer to terrible and some are closer to good. So I think it's hard to answer in general. I see a lot of on-prem old school systems that barely log anything, just like log the fact that you logged in. That's it. So, I think it's similar on the cloud world where some stuff's really mature and some stuff isn't.
Yeah, I feel like as well as teaching developers how, to integrate security from the beginning, they should teach them how to do logging correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I give a talk around what I call an identity creep, right? Which is basically just a sort of general kind of thought leadership type of talk where it's just trying to get people to think. And one of the examples I use is I say, look, we just created an AWS account and we dumped the security policy for that account, and it was 20,000 lines of JSON, and it was like default or whatever, or pretty close to that. So how are you supposed to sift through that and understand what the heck's going on? And maybe the point is you're not supposed to, but like there's definitely too much. And I don't necessarily want to call out too many service providers, but some of them it's just like you're literally logging like every little tiny like click inside the SaaS or whatever app, and it's for AI. That's all. I don't know. I think these are old enough where it's I don't know. It was just like someone left the log level too close to debug or whatever. So yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I'm just writing down some identity creep. I'm just going to try to find your talk on that. So so we've got access certification in here, and that was some of the stuff that came up in the our good friends at Gartner, of course, are all in on, identity governance and administration markets. So is access certification something you guys care about, or do companies do it incorrectly? Is there a better way they could do that?
So, So I was talking to a company the other day. I really liked the conversation with the head of security there, and he was telling me all this amazing stuff they're doing, both on the just kind of developer side for their business, as well as the security side. And then we started talking about attestation and governance, and he said, everything I just told you, attestation and governance are still PowerShell scripts and spreadsheets. And it's still this huge pain around understanding kind of who has what access and should they have it, right? And you have to do it if you're under any sort of compliance or regulatory, sort of regime or restrictions, and or scope, I guess is a better word. And so, companies really struggle with going through like, what should you have? And so, I was talking to my friend who's just a trader at one of the big financial institutions and telling him kind of what we were doing. And he was talking about, oh yeah, every year when that checklist comes out, I just say select all. Yes, I need everything done. Right? Like he doesn't want to go through and actually like get to least privilege, because why? Because he knows it's going to be like a month or two to get it back if he actually needs it. Right? So I think a lot of it comes back to a challenging provisioning process or provisioning system, which makes people keep everything. But long story short, yes, people need to do access certification. I think more people should, even if they're not regulated, because you just need to review, like give an access review, have that, need to know, that least privilege mentality. That's going to help everybody out. Right.
Yeah. Would something like an escrow type system work in that case, where it's like you kind of like an enterprise level pseudo, so you have certain access to certain things for a certain amount of time?
Yeah. I mean, I like to say, like, as soon as you give someone access, that should have a half-life and it should start decaying. Right. But instead we give someone something and it's kind of like 0 or 1, right? Like, okay, right. You have it now. Like, okay. So yeah, any way that I think companies can get to a place where it's more of a just-in-time grant, or it's sort of decaying as soon as they have it. Slack's doing something cool now. I don't know if this is new, but I only discovered it maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And we use Slack and we invite, guests and contractors and other things, where when you grant a guest access, you can set a default time to kick them out. Right. And if you don't do anything, it'll remind you. And if you forget to like extend, it just kicks them out. Right. So it's kind of good that by default they get kicked out. So I wish more systems would do that, but sadly they don't.
Yeah, I've been on a couple of engagements where we've used Slack, and I keep getting, alerts in my Slack. It says, oh, they've given you 3 more days to do something. I'm like, well, my engagement ended a week and a half ago. Why am I still on this? And I end up having to remove myself only because I'm, conscientious security guy. I shouldn't have access to these things, and even then some companies, it's like, oh yeah. Like one of them gave us access to all of their channels on Slack. And I'm like, no. I don't need that. Just make a special contractor channel for us and a handful of folks who are on this engagement. I don't need to see all of your, futureware and your roadmaps and, all of your emails and stuff that come through. And they're like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, maybe that's why you got all the findings you had earlier. Anyway, it adds to it. So we talked about governance. We talked about privacy issues. What kind of what kind of privacy issues could somebody come up against adding this kind of technology to their environment that they maybe need to understand?
Yeah, I think it just in general, privacy is a hot topic, right? And everyone's concerned, or at least more people are concerned. So it certainly comes up in our discussions. But I think it's a lot of it is what do people have access to, and the stuff they have access to. What's in that data? Is it sensitive? Does it need some level of privacy? Because then that should drive even further scrutiny for access, right? And so, what we try to do is, and we try to do this in the endpoint world too, is, collect the bare minimum that you need to do what you think you need to do for, cyber detection and defense and that kind of thing, and incident response. So, we, like, for example, we only collect metadata about, files and things. We don't actually pull the content of the files or, stuff like that. But, I think it's still going to come down to comfort level and then that kind of thing. But, companies themselves are having trouble trying to understand privacy within the org, right? Like I said, who has access to sensitive HR folders and things like that. Right. So, I think just in general, there is a match between privacy and good, access control and good, IAM or identity governance capabilities.
Right.
Ben, can you walk us through an attack? Just make something up and tell us how identity governance helps with that.
Yeah. So, just making something up, I think a lot of times, attacks still start with a few different ways, but it still starts with the end user, right? So it could be, credential stuffing, and they get into your email account. And okay, once they're in their email account, obviously they're going to think about how they can leverage that. So, can they use that to then say, go to Salesforce and say, reset my password, if they're, depending on how they're, integrated, and then the password reset goes to email, and then they're kind of into Salesforce, right? So there's things like that, as well as just, using that email account to contact other people within the environment, as a legitimate user, to then further try to get access or get something turned on, et cetera, maybe even submit tickets to get access to something, right? And a lot of times what happens is, once you get access, and this is not just specific to kind of cloud, it's specific to, it's generic to kind of any operation, is once you get access, you want to maintain that access. And so in the endpoint, or the sort of on-prem world, you might be installing a rootkit or a backdoor or something. In the cloud world, you might be setting up mail forwarding rules. You might be installing a mailbox delegation to a new user that you managed to create, if you had privileges to create that user. So then, that user can still access the mailbox, but the legitimate owner of that mailbox, there's no kind of weird logins anymore from them, right? So, they don't really see anything, but someone else can read all their email. So, I think there's areas like that are really interesting. And a lot of it, again, comes down to what truly is this set of indicators of compromise or malicious activity in these apps. But it really comes down to access, because with a lot of cloud, and we could talk about EC2 instances on AWS or whatever, but with a lot of cloud, especially SaaS, there's nothing really to execute. So it really depends on access. And so the more you can use governance to really trim down what people have access to, then it's limited, right? All you can do, okay, yeah, you compromise my account, you can see 4 records in Salesforce, and that sucks, but that's not the end of the world. And I don't know if you guys have been hearing this, but the term I kind of thought was one of the buzzwords of the year. I think it was maybe 2017, but maybe 2018 was blast radius, right? Where if you can shrink access, you've essentially shrunk the blast radius, meaning the damage that someone can do if they completely compromise you is the minimum amount based on your need for your role and your job. So, bringing that back to governance, the more you can help shrink that surface area or that, kind of privilege creep and get it back to what people truly need, then you at least know the damage is as minimum as possible without impacting that employee's productivity. And then, other things are you maybe do go through malware, and then once you get on someone's box, maybe you can grab a token or, do something against an API, or log into the user now that you're on the on-prem internal side, add an account to Active Directory, and then, maybe there's federation through Active Directory to log into some of these cloud apps. So there's lots of different ways that are actually not that different from on-prem attacks, but they do require much more around, accounts and access, because there's not usually anything to execute.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to ask about was, where does this sit in your environment? Obviously, if you're a cloud-based company, or maybe you have a blended environment, maybe you've got some on-prem stuff, and maybe you've got something in the cloud. Where would this sit? And we talked earlier about you can do this with a couple of scripts and some SIM logs and stuff. How big a footprint are we talking for your system? Can it run in a Docker container? Can it, does it work with Kubernetes and all that stuff? I mean, tell us a little bit about where this would sit architecturally. I mean, does it integrate with your Active Directory? Does it monitor and also prevent? If it doesn't prevent, can you send alerts to your IPS to also cause blocking effects? So, just kind of give us an idea of where everything sits.
Yeah. So we've taken the approach that we ourselves are a SaaS, because we feel like we do need to utilize an analytics pipeline where you pull in a bunch of data, you're storing it, you're cleaning it up, you're doing analysis, you're doing detection, you're doing ML on it, and then the user just logs in. They don't have anything to deploy, anything to really worry about, right? And I think you see that across other places where other tools are moving to cloud-based and things like that. So yeah, for us, we've really focused on fast install. We had a 500,000 account university install the other day, and it took 5 minutes. because all they have to do is grant us a token, right? They just log in. It's like OAuth, grant us a token. And then we ourselves use things like Kubernetes and, containers and stuff and spin those up to then go collect the data just for that one customer, right? So it's like isolated, and then, pull in the data and throw it through our pipeline. And then they can, access it via the user interface, web app or APIs and things like that. I think one of the challenges being a new vendor or a newer vendor is there's so many ways we could integrate with your tech stack, and us having to place bets on it. But, it's the normal stuff like, you can push alerts or you could pull data from us to enrich something else and that kind of thing. And so, we've really focused on low overhead and mostly just, get up and running in a few minutes and start using it.
So that makes you guys a nice juicy target, I would imagine, for a bad guy if they found you on the network, right? I mean, what kind of things are you doing to lock down the system that you have to harden yourselves against an attacker? Yeah,
so I think first thing is culture, right? Like everyone here knows that we're getting some pretty interesting access and interesting customers and things like that. So we have to take security seriously. And so every engineer, even the people in the company that don't have as technical a role, are going through security training and are really thinking about what's our threat profile and that kind of thing. So there's a bunch that just starts with like buy-in from the whole business. And maybe that's common sense now, but it seems like too many companies aren't doing that, right? And then secondarily, it starts with really focusing on the infrastructure, because like if our infrastructure gets compromised, it doesn't really matter what's on top, right? Like and so and then from there, it's application security, making sure we're pen testing, making sure we're doing static and dynamic analysis every time we push code, all of that stuff, and then sort of the third area is corporate security, just making sure the tools we use, like the SaaS apps we use to do our jobs or email or whatever, that we have enough security controls on those to really reduce that risk. And of course, we use our own product against ourselves too. So nice. That's kind of cool. But yeah, we're it's a never-ending journey. And getting help, getting consultants to come check us out, and do some outside scans and things like that. So really just kind of making sure we're in good shape so that people can trust us.
How many Node.js libraries are you using on the web UI on your system? You're not. I was going to ask what the tech stack was, but I'm assuming it's some kind of Angular Node.js, because that's what everybody
going
as
back
a service.
To a previous episode that we've recorded about that.
Yeah, we've done a few on that. So
I mean, third-party libraries are a huge concern, right? And I think that's something to worry about, because it's so easy so there's a couple things, right? So like it's so easy for a developer to just add a library and it looks legit, and maybe it is legit, and then PyPy or Node or whatever gets NPM or whatever gets hit. But then it's the same thing, like it's pretty amazing how many people are logging into stuff with their company addresses, right? Like if you just look at like OAuth, like, approvals in G Suite or Office 365 of, I'm going to log in, sign in with Google, sign in with Microsoft, whatever. Like there's a huge long tail of stuff where you'll have, 30,000 person company, and the number of apps that are only used by one person, but there's tons of them, right? Tons of them. So I treat that similarly to all the open source libraries that an individual developer could just add. And it's really hard to gate that and still let people do their jobs. So, I think those are some common problems now for environments.
Does this also run on users' computers, or is this like like we talked about, running in a Docker or whatever? Is there an agent or something that runs on the box? Maybe it says, hey, you shouldn't log in with this account. You should be logging in with this account instead. Or, you shouldn't be trying to log into Node.js with your Google credentials. Is there anything like that, or, to kind of help, users protect themselves from themselves?
So I'll say we have some interesting stuff around that in the works, but I'm going to leave that as a teaser. Oh,
sorry. I just assumed that would be a logical progression. It's like you're going to protect the environment, and then you got to kind of scale down to the people. So,
but I will say we don't have any sort of agents or anything on the actual endpoints or phones or anything. It's really kind of cloud to cloud communication and that kind of thing. So users don't have to change how they do their job, but you are trying to clean up and sort of guide them to have better hygiene and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, the other thing too is we get asked quite a bit, are we going to partner or integrate with, EDR, other kinds of, telemetry that's very complementary? The short answer is yes, at some point. The longer answer is, yeah, we'd have to figure out like when it makes sense to do it and, like priorities and things like that. But, for now we're really focused on the stuff that's not really well understood in your environment and in terms of the cloud apps.
Right. So I know your salespeople probably don't do this, but when they go in and they find out that there's, this company has 800 different roles and do they ever ask, have you guys tried paring down your roles or, doing a role audit to see if there's anything that doesn't make sense anymore? You've got nested roles inside of one another. Is there any kind of pre-wiring or, staging before you put that in? Do you ask them to go and do an audit before you actually add that? Or do you just assume that, well, if they're going to have 800 roles, they're always going to have 800 roles?
No, I mean, so great question. Companies are like, please help us. And not just us, like, we have a lot of sort of cousin or sister companies now that are, we sort of friended other companies maybe we're not completely competitive with. So we're at conferences together and, sort of on panels together and stuff. And we're all kind of saying similar stories to each other, which is everyone's saying, please help me figure out which of my groups are no longer needed and where my admins are idle and, stuff like that and overprivileged users. So, I don't think it's the case where you said 800 will always be 800. I think people are desperately trying to shrink that. And it's just really a matter of like, it's pretty laborious and sort of manual, like I said, spreadsheets and PowerShell scripts to try to enumerate things. And, so if people can get help, they really seem willing to take the help.
And that was the end of part 1 of our podcast with Ben Johnson from Obsidian Security. Next week, you're going to hear us talk about what it takes to start a new business, how to work with small teams, and we're going to go over some buzzwords that we all seem to enjoy, like VC and why companies need to move to Santa Clara, California, for instance. Also, you'll hear some book recommendations for us leaders and senior leadership out there to help us become better leaders. So there you go. All right. So announcements before we go. B-Sides Birmingham, Alabama is happening. It starts on, there's information at B-Sides BHAM on Twitter, and the CFP is open currently until August the 11th. So yeah, that's I think that's all the announcements I had for this week. You can find us on Twitter. Mr. Betcher's at Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. You can follow InfoSister on Twitter, INFOSYSTIR. You can follow me at Brian Brake, and the official podcast Twitter is at Brakesec. Our interview this week with Chicago Ben Johnson. You can find him on Twitter at Chicago Ben, and I think his company is Obsidian Sec, so you can check that out too. We have a Slack. If you feel like you want to join a community of like-minded individuals, you can join our Slack by sending us a DM on Twitter to Brakesec, or you can email us at bds.podcast@gmail.com. We have CTF Club going on there, book clubs, a lot of good, meaningful conversations with people about mental health issues as well. Speaking of mental health, Ms. Berlin does a nonprofit, Villages at conferences. She started up a nonprofit called Hackers, Mental Health Hackers, and you can follow them on Twitter at Hackers Health. That's Hackers, multiple, and Health on Twitter. So... InfoSec Campout conference is August 24th. We still have tickets available for the conference and the camping spots, which is a camping conference. We still have a few of those, so if you're interested, check out https://infoseccampout.com. We have a Patreon. If you want to support the show, give us a little tip jar or something, you can go to our show notes and click on that and donate as much or as little as you want. The podcast is always going to be free. It just that is used on a monthly basis to support our Zoom web conferencing that we use not only for the podcast, but for all the meetup stuff that we do on our Slack. It goes for hosting fees. It goes for just time and effort to get the podcast out, because it does take I'd say a couple hours a week to interview everybody, and another hour or so or two to edit the audio. So we appreciate everybody who helps out with that. We're on iTunes, Google Play Store, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Apple. Yeah, on iTunes, you make sure if you leave us some feedback, because apparently the new algorithms now make it so that the more reviews you have, the better visibility you have to the environment as a whole. So the more reviews we get, the more people get to see us, and then that kind of feeds like a feedback loop. So that's always good to do. Google Play Store, I mentioned those already. We're not on Slacker yet. We're on Spotify. We're on iHeartRadio. We have an RSS feed, and you can also go to www.breakingsecurity.com, and you can check out all the ways you can get a hold of us there. That was it for Breaking Down Security this week. We'll be back with part 2 with Ben Johnson. Have a great week. Be kind to one another. Take care of you, because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.